All right. So, digging into this idea of rich habits, poor habits, um, you guys sent in some interesting stuff around Tom Corley and Michael Yardney's book. And it got me thinking, right? Like, we all have routines, those things we do almost without realizing it. But what if those very routines, like, have this huge impact on our financial lives?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? The book itself, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, it's based on 5 years of research, Corley, studying the daily habits of, well, a lot of people, 233 wealthy individuals compared to 128 who are, struggling financially.
And the premise, if I'm getting this right, is that it's not some big lucky break or like some secret advantage. It's about the habits, those small repeated actions that over time really add up and determine our financial success or, lack of it.
That's exactly the core idea, yeah. And what we're going to do in this deep dive, right, is try to really unpack Corley's findings. We're going to try to pull out those like crucial insights that can actually show our listeners the practical, everyday differences between these two groups, the wealthy and the poor. Not just, theory, but actual things they do differently.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Corley's own story kind of sets the stage for this whole idea of habits mattering, right? From what I've read, his family experienced a pretty big financial setback, and it was during that tough period that he started observing these like subtle but persistent differences in daily routines, like the way people approach things. It really clicked for him that financial success, it wasn't just about one big event, it was about all those tiny actions that people were doing day in and day out.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? The book points out something really interesting. Like 40% of our daily actions are habitual. That's almost half our day running on autopilot, basically these ingrained patterns. And that's what makes habits so powerful, right? They're like these levers for change.
Yeah.
If we can actually figure out how to reshape those patterns, consciously.
So it's like once those habits are set, they just keep running in the background, good or bad. And this book, it makes a distinction between what it calls rich habits and poor habits. Right? Like rich habits being those proactive, success-oriented routines that tend to, well, lead to good things, especially financial prosperity.
Right. And on the other hand, you have the poor habits, which are the ones that seem to, hold people back and perpetuate financial difficulties, like a cycle that's hard to break.
So to get specific here, Corley had to define what he meant by rich and poor for his study. I vaguely remember the numbers, but could you refresh my memory on those benchmarks he used?
Sure. So Corley, for his research, considered someone rich if they had an annual income of over $160,000 and liquid assets of at least $3.2 million. And on the other side, poor was defined as having an income under $35,000 per year and total assets less than $50,000.
Okay, so pretty clear-cut, right? It wasn't just a general sense of doing well or struggling. There were actual numbers behind those categories. And it makes you wonder, like, how do these habits become so ingrained? The book delves a bit into the brain science, doesn't it? Like, what's going on in our heads that makes these habits so hard to break?
Absolutely, yeah. The formation of habits, it's mostly handled by this part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It's really important for, learning how to do things and then making those actions automatic. So as we repeat actions, our brain actually creates pathways, neural pathways. And the more we do something, the stronger those pathways become, which means those actions just become easier and easier. We don't have to think about them as much.
It's like a well-worn path in the woods, right? The more you walk it, the easier it is to follow, and it becomes almost automatic to take that path. But the downside is that same mechanism applies to bad habits, too.
Exactly. The same efficiency that makes good habits almost effortless also applies to the not-so-helpful ones.
Makes sense. So 5 years of research, interviewing 361 individuals, that's a pretty serious study. What were some of the core principles that, guided Corley's approach? Like, how did he go about collecting all this data and making sure it was reliable?
Right. One of the big things for Corley was focusing on what people actually did, like observable behaviors. He didn't just want to hear people's opinions or beliefs. He wanted to see how they actually spent their days, the actions they were taking. And through these really in-depth interviews, he managed to identify over 300 separate habits. That's a lot to work with.
Wow, over 300. So I guess it wasn't just a simple checklist, right? This was deep observation of people's daily lives.
It really was, yeah. And then he analyzed all that data to see if there were any patterns, like connections between these habits and their financial status. And, Michael Yardney, the co-author, he brought in his psychology expertise, which really added another layer to understanding how, mindset and self-discipline play a role in all of this.
So it's not just what people do, it's also how they think about those actions, right? Like the underlying beliefs and motivations that drive those habits.
Precisely. It's a more holistic picture, not just a list of do's and don'ts.
Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. What were some of the most eye-opening differences between the rich habits and the poor habits? Where did the really big contrasts show up?
Well, one of the most striking differences was around goal setting, like having a clear vision for the future and actually taking steps to achieve it. It turned out that 70% of the wealthy individuals in this study were actively pursuing at least one major goal each year.
Okay, 70%. That's pretty impressive. What about the poor group?
In contrast, only 3% of those in the poor category were doing the same.
Whoa, that's a huge difference, 70% versus 3%. So it's not just about wanting things, it's about actually setting those goals and working towards them consistently.
Exactly. And the wealthy individuals, they didn't just keep those goals in their heads, right? They would write them down, track their progress, and make sure those goals aligned with a bigger vision they had for their lives. It
Yeah.
was very deliberate.
So it's the difference between, vaguely thinking I should save more money and actually setting a specific target, like I'm going to put aside $300 every month for savings by cutting back on eating out. Like one's just a wish, the other's a plan.
Exactly. It's about making it concrete and actionable. And another big contrast was in the area of self-improvement, that constant desire to learn and grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that would be crucial, like always seeking out new knowledge and skills. What did the research show on that?
It showed a pretty remarkable difference. 88% of the wealthy individuals dedicated at least 30 minutes every day to reading for self-improvement. And not just any reading, they were reading specifically about their careers, personal development, or gaining knowledge that could help them in their work.
So it's not just flipping through magazines, it's intentional learning, right? Like reading industry publications or books on leadership versus, mindlessly scrolling through social media.
Exactly. It's actively seeking out information that can make you better, broaden your horizons.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole thing about health and fitness.
Which on the surface might seem a bit unrelated to finances, but I can see the connection, like having the energy and mental clarity to make good decisions.
You're right. The connection is definitely there. The research showed that 76% of the wealthy individuals exercised aerobically at least 4 days a week, and 70% made a conscious effort to keep their junk food intake below 300 calories per day.
Okay, so they were pretty disciplined about their health. What about the poor group? Were the numbers similar?
Not at all. Only 23% of the poor group exercised regularly, and just 3% paid attention to their junk food intake.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So it's not just about looking good, it's about having the energy, the stamina, the mental sharpness to be productive and make smart decisions, right?
Exactly. It's all connected. A healthy body often leads to a healthier mind, and that can definitely impact your financial choices. And speaking of connections, the research also looked at how people manage their relationships, which is a huge part of life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've all heard that saying, your network is your net worth. Did this study back that up? Were there differences in how the two groups approached relationships?
There definitely were, and pretty significant ones. 79% of the wealthy individuals spend at least 5 hours each month on networking, and 80% made a point of connecting with people on their birthdays.
So it's not just about collecting business cards, it's about actually building those relationships, staying in touch.
Right, exactly. It's about nurturing those connections because you never know where opportunities might come from or who might be able to offer support when you need it.
Like going to industry events, actually talking to people, building those relationships, as opposed to just kind of, staying in your own lane.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and building a strong network. And another key area was how people manage their money. Specifically, the whole idea of living below your means.
Yeah, that seems like a fundamental principle for building wealth, right? Not spending more than you earn.
And the data really supported that. 93% of the wealthy individuals attributed their financial success, at least partially, to saving consistently. They aim to save at least 20% of their income and live on the remaining 80%.
So basically, paying yourself first. Putting that money aside before even thinking about spending it. What about the poor group? Were they doing something similar?
Unfortunately, not really. A whopping 97% of them reported living paycheck to paycheck.
97%, that's a big difference. So it's that discipline of consistently putting money aside versus constantly being on the edge, struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. And that consistent saving allows you to invest, build a safety net,
Hmm.
while the constant overspending just leads to debt and instability. It's like two different paths.
Totally. Okay, so we talked about goals, self-improvement, health, relationships, money management. What about procrastination, like getting things done efficiently? Was that a factor too?
It was, and a big one. The wealthy individuals were much more action-oriented. 67% of them said they completed at least 70% of their daily to-do lists.
So they were good at actually getting stuff done, not just planning it. What about the poor group?
Only 19% of them were hitting that same level of completion.
Okay, so a big gap there too. It seems like that ability to execute, to not put things off, is really important.
Absolutely. Procrastination can be a huge drain on productivity, and it can also damage relationships, both personal and professional. If you're always delaying things, people start to lose trust.
Makes sense. So that proactive do it now attitude seems to be a big part of success. What about emotional control? Like how did that factor into the research?
Corley found that 94% of the wealthy individuals had good control over their emotions. They were able to avoid impulsive reactions, stay calm under pressure.
So they didn't let their emotions dictate their decisions, especially financial ones.
Exactly. They were able to think things through, make rational choices, even in tough situations.
I can see how that would be really important, like not making rash decisions based on fear or anger, especially when it comes to money.
Absolutely. And in contrast, only 31% of the poor group felt they had similar control over their emotions.
That's a pretty stark difference. So emotional discipline, being able to regulate those impulses, it seems like that plays a big role in financial
Oh,
success.
yeah, it definitely seems to. And finally, there's the whole aspect of pursuing dreams, having that big vision that motivates you. Did the research touch on that at all?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Like, how does that sense of purpose, that drive to achieve something meaningful, how does that factor into the equation?
Well, 80% of the wealthy individuals in the study were focused on at least one major dream-driven goal, and they actively aligned their daily habits to support that goal. Like every little action was a step towards that bigger vision.
So their habits weren't just random, they were all connected to something larger, something they were passionate about.
Exactly. And on the other side, there was often a lack of clear direction among the poor group. Like their daily actions didn't seem connected to any larger aspiration. It was more like going through the motions without a clear sense of purpose.
It's like those rich habits become way more meaningful, more sustainable when they're tied to something you really care about. Like if your dream is to open a bakery and you're saving money, learning about business, practicing your baking skills, those actions all make sense. They're all part of a bigger plan.
Absolutely. It's about having that vision and then letting it guide your everyday actions. Now, the book doesn't just focus on the good habits. It also talks about specific poor habits that tend to be more common among those who are struggling financially.
Right. So it's like identifying the things that are holding you back, the things you need to stop doing. What were some of the key poor habits that Corley's research highlighted?
Well, a few stood out as being pretty prevalent. Gambling, for instance, was much more common among the poor group. 52% of them gambled on a weekly basis, compared to only 23% of the wealthy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like hoping for a quick fix instead of focusing on long-term strategies. What else?
Another big one was the belief in bad luck. 74% of the poor group felt that bad luck played a significant role in their lives, compared to only 4% of the wealthy individuals. And perhaps not surprisingly, excessive TV watching was a big differentiator. 77% of the poor group spent an hour or more each day watching TV, compared to only 33% of the wealthy.
So it's those habits that, consume time and resources, but don't really contribute to growth or progress. Like instead of spending money on lottery tickets, you could be investing it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those patterns and making conscious choices to break free from them. Now, even though the research points out all these differences, the book also offers a really encouraging perspective with this concept called the ripple effect.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that. The ripple effect.
The idea is that even adopting one positive, rich habit can trigger a whole chain reaction of positive changes in your life without you having to force each change individually.
Okay, so like a domino effect, one change leading to another.
Exactly. For example, let's say someone decides to start exercising regularly, right? They might find that they naturally start making healthier food choices. They sleep better, they have more energy. Like the initial positive habit creates this momentum for other positive changes to happen.
So it's not about trying to change everything overnight, which is, pretty overwhelming. It's about finding that one key habit, that keystone habit that can kickstart a whole bunch of positive shifts. I like that.
It's about building momentum gradually and letting those positive changes build on each other.
So for our listeners who are, taking all of this in, what are some practical steps they can take based on rich habits, poor habits? Like, how can they actually apply these insights to their own lives?
Well, the book really emphasizes starting small and focusing on consistency. Like, don't try to change everything at once. Just pick one new habit to work on each month. Make it manageable.
Yeah, that seems a lot less daunting, right? One habit a month.
Exactly. They also suggest a 30-day challenge for each new habit. So
Mm.
let's say you want to develop the habit of saving. You commit to saving a certain percentage of your income for 30 days straight. And the book talks about using tools like to-do lists to combat procrastination. And it highlights the importance of having mentors. It turns out that 93% of the wealthy individuals in the study had mentors.
So it's a mix of internal shifts, like consciously adopting new routines, and external support, like seeking guidance from people who've already achieved success.
Exactly. It's like a two-pronged approach.
Okay, so to give an example, like let's say someone realizes they spend way too much time watching TV, and they decide to replace just 30 minutes of that with reading something related to their career every day. Over time, that increased knowledge could lead to new ideas, more confidence, maybe even a promotion or a better job. That's like the ripple effect in action,
A
right?
perfect
Yeah,
example, yeah. Small changes consistently applied, leading to big results over time.
I like it. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, the core message of rich habits, poor habits, based on all that research, is that our daily routines, the things we often do without even thinking, those are the real drivers of our financial success. It's not just luck or circumstance, it's the cumulative impact of all those small actions.
And that's a really empowering message because it means we have the power to change, right? We can choose to examine our habits, identify the ones that are holding us back, and consciously work on adopting new, more beneficial ones.
Exactly. So, for all of you listening out there, as you think about those rich habits we discussed, like setting clear goals, constantly learning, building strong relationships, managing your money wisely, which one or two stand out to you? Which ones feel like the most important areas for you to focus on personally?
And this deep dive has piqued your interest. I definitely recommend checking out Rich Habits, Poor Habits itself. It's full of great examples and specific advice.
Absolutely. So the takeaway here is that building a solid financial future, it's not about some magic formula or overnight success. It's about those small, consistent steps, day after day, cultivating those rich habits that can lead to real, lasting change. It's a journey, but it's a journey we can all choose to take.